Chapter 1, and there were a series of articles from Chapter 1. There are actually a lot of them. Do y'all remember Textilizer?
Yeah, the police could hook a device up to your phone to see the activity on your phone if you had been in an accident.
Yeah, so if you're in a car accident, and many states now have got laws that forbid or limit cell phone use, certainly forbid or limit texting while you're driving, the Textilizer is a device. And what would it actually demonstrate if they hooked it up to your phone?
If you'd sent a text message around the time.
So it wouldn't say where you were, it wouldn't say what you sent, it wouldn't say what you literally were looking at if it was a web page, but it would just note that there was activity on the phone, and they would be able to pinpoint it, in theory, about the time of the accident. So like a breathalyzer you blow, and it's not going to say what you drank, it will say how much you drank. This is not going to say where you browsed or what you sent, but it would say that you browsed or you sent something. And the thought would be is that this is going to be something that might be helpful dealing with liability, dealing ultimately with your ability to drive, or maybe you had broken some other laws. They haven't quite perfected this yet, but this is coming. And there are questions about this idea of how far government can go, because a lot of people don't want government plugging anything into their cell phones, because you could argue that that's pretty private information. Do y'all remember when all Muslims are suspect?
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
It's when the NYPD was basically spying on Muslim communities and their mosques and basically anywhere that they frequented.
Anywhere that they frequented. This could be mosques, this could be coffee shops, this could be any number of places. And these police officers basically went in undercover, and they were just listening in for anything that might deal with terrorism. What was the problem with this?
It was discrimination.
They were all-
Viewed as them by discrimination.
Yeah, the sense of it was that they were targeting Muslims specifically because they were Muslim. This was in the aftermath of 9/11, and there was a sense that, hey, we're going to watch you to make sure that there's not a 9/12, maybe for lack of a better term on this.
And they were also doing that in New York City. They were looking at Muslim communities in other states.
Yeah,
They did. They not only dealt with New York City, but they went outside of local jurisdiction. You could argue they even went outside of state jurisdiction as they were doing this. Did they find anything?
Yeah, they prevented a couple of terrorist acts.
They did. The biggest one, I think, being a bombing potentially of the Brooklyn Bridge, and there were a couple of other things that the article mentioned. For our purposes, though, you could argue, and I think we did talk about this, that maybe this is good law enforcement because they did catch some things and they did prevent some things. You could argue that this is incredible discrimination, and in fact, this shouldn't be done. And ultimately, they got caught and they were reprimanded. The NYPD can't do this anymore, and the sense is that this is judging the book by its cover, and no, you can't go forward with this. Lethal force. Y'all remember the lethal force article?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's the one in Florida, right?
Stand your ground
Yeah,
laws.
stand your ground, there you go.
Yeah, stand your ground laws. Take a good look at this one. And, we talked a couple of different times about some of the gun laws that are out there. And this did overlap with Trayvon a little bit. It overlapped with Castle Doctrine a little bit. But basically the idea...
What is the RV also?
It was.
Yeah,
This is where the logic came from. That old man and that old woman, the retired man and the retired woman were actually driving around in their RV. Somebody did an RV invasion, and in fact, the retired man shot him and killed him, and they wanted to bring him up on murder charges, even though he was defending his wife and his RV. That's where stand your ground laws ultimately came from. What's the gist of this? How do these stand your ground laws work?
You don't have to retreat from like a dangerous situation, essentially.
Yeah, it really kind of goes to the idea of being threatened. If you are out in public and in fact you feel threatened, then you do not have to retreat, but in fact you can literally stand your ground, and then when you stand your ground, you can act. And in this instance, it mentions up there Trayvon and different things like this, but there are a number of other cases. And the sense of it is that, yeah, people are legally able to protect themselves, but you could also argue that because threatened is such a nebulous term, what threatens you might be different than what threatens you, which might be different than what threatens you, and it's really hard to put a standard on what being threatened is that would ultimately justify the action. Take a good look at this one, and I think it even mentions in there that crime maybe has not necessarily gone down, but legal homicide has actually gone up, and this means that people are getting killed. Maybe these laws are being abused a little bit, but it's legal to do the way that the laws are written. So kind of keep that thought in mind. And we had several that deal with guns, so there might be a theme in this. The car chase. Y'all remember the car chase?
Yes.
There's a video. Whoa, that's not the article. Yeah, that's not it, I don't think. I will see if I can't figure out what the devil is going on with that. That scares me. But you'll remember going back in here to chapter 1 and going into the videos. I believe I had actually posted, I posted the clip in here. And the clip dealing with the high-speed chase, if you remember, demonstrated how that young man, and I believe he was rendered a quadriplegic after his car was bumped or rammed by Georgia police in a high-speed chase. And if you remember on this, he was suing for incredible damages. And did you remember what amendment it was that ultimately the violation? Go ahead. It was the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search and seizure. They rammed his car, and then ultimately they went through his car after, and you saw the crash, how it flipped over and different things like this. And the kid was like 18 years old. I mean, he was really young. Now, to be fair, an 18-year-old that just gets scared of the police and drives away as fast as he can, there's something seems a little sus about that. The officer, was the officer ultimately convicted?
No.
No, the officer was not ultimately convicted. This was actually judged as reasonable. And the trick on these high-speed chases is the idea that increasingly, it's not necessarily the police or the drivers that are getting injured, but it is the injured people, it is the people that are around the chase that are getting it, the bikers or the runners or the other drivers, these kinds of things. And what you'll see though is that when you looked at that video, there were a number of other drivers in that relatively late evening down in Georgia, and ultimately they bumped the car when they got it safe. You can hear them discussing how they were going to go through this. I don't think they anticipated the car to lose control like that, but it was deemed as justifiable by the actual police. So yeah, or by the courts, I should say, the police action. The Bloomberg gun giveaway, do y'all remember that one?
Yeah.
Go ahead, anybody.
Mayor Bloomberg was sending undercover officers or undercover people out of state to gun dealers in like Virginia or Ohio or wherever they were going to. And this happened in Virginia, the Bloomberg giveaway. So he's doing that for straw purchases of firearms, and then trying to charge the people in New York with it. So
why would New York have a connection to straw purchases in Virginia or Ohio or some of these other places?
Because they were saying people from New York were leaving the state where it was hard to purchase a gun, drive to Virginia where they could purchase one fast and easy, and then drive back to New York and bring in the guns to New York.
And they would commit crimes or potential illegal actions, whatever the case was, in New York with these illegally purchased guns. And you're right, they went undercover. They actually even set up cameras on some of these folks so that they could record these. And ultimately, if you go back and you look and you read the article, you look at the video, basically what you see in there is that these straw purchases, say a man and his sister would go into a gun store, and the man would be talking about the gun that he wanted to buy, but he couldn't legally buy it, so his sister would buy it for him. And then as soon as they got out of the gun store, he would have the gun, and she would go in a separate direction. He would go back up to New York State. And what were the dealers doing? Because they were suffering lawsuits. I think it said some of the stores closed down. Some of them had crushing legal fees. What were they doing to try and generate some business?
So they held a raffle. They call it the Bloomberg gun giveaway, and I think if you bought a certain amount of money or something, or a certain amount of guns, or spent a certain amount of money at the place, you would get a raffle ticket. And they had, I think it was like a handgun and a rifle they were raffling off, and a couple guns. And so that's what they did to raise the money, was this raffle, and you would get the 2 guns. They were calling it the Bloomberg gun giveaway.
And they specifically forbid Bloomberg or any of his family members from being a part of this. They were basically digging on him during the course of this. And think about it, there's the theme with New York. I mean, this is a couple of times now where New York has basically, in an attempt to protect itself, not just left New York City, but it left New York State ultimately to go after things. So when you put this into context, take a good look at that, because again, we're talking about federalism in this chapter. It seems like New York City should be limited to New York City, but they were going not just into neighboring states now, but states that were several states away to try and limit these gun purchases. And they did get some of these gun dealers put out of business, but this was kind of viewed as like a political stunt, really more than a real policy. So kind of keep that in mind. This disaster relief one is a quickie, and I'm not going to give you a lot on this one, but basically the idea on this is that, you know, we kind of have this sense that the federal government needs to step up and needs to help local communities when there's hurricanes or some form of disaster, whatever the case might be. And this is kind of in the context of maybe Hurricane Katrina going back. But literally, if you go back to presidents from previous years, whether you go back all the way to maybe, you know, James Madison, or whether you go back to some of the folks like Grover Cleveland in the 1800s, they're saying consistently that disaster relief cannot be found in the U.S. Constitution, so they did not believe that the federal government should actually provide it. Take a look at that. This isn't going to be something that I'm going to ask you to write an essay on, but it is something that could ultimately be a multiple choicer. And do you remember the magic marker article?
Yeah.
What was this one?
Another instance of natural disasters. I forget where.
Anybody remember where it was?
Virginia, right?
It was Virginia, Newport News. And they said Newport News was not all that different. Maybe population-wise it would have been smaller, but racial composition not that much different than New Orleans. So this was considered kind of a good example of what you should do. Go ahead, Chase, I'm sorry.
So, I forget the guy's position. It wasn't the mayor, was it?
It wasn't, but this was one of the guys, like it says up here, in charge of evacuation. So this would have been one of the natural disaster people,
So they're going
basically.
door to door and trying to get people to hop on these buses to evacuate. And when people would refuse, they would hand them a magic marker and ask them to write their social security number on their forearm so they could identify them when they were essentially killed by the storm.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And it seems like kind of a jerk thing to do, but it also helped mobilize people to actually get out of their homes, get onto the buses, and get evacuated to safety. Because his argument was, okay, if we can get these people out, this is not going to endanger my people so much because they're not going to have to go back to dig these people out. I mean, literally after the storm has gone through. It's not going to endanger my people. It's not going to cost us as much. This is going to be a lot smoother if we get people into centralized planned areas, is basically what we're saying. So, and this was Judkins, I believe Jim Judkins was his name. And take a look at that one, because that's another one that there could be some potential with as far as the exam is concerned, because we did actually spend some time on this one. Looking back